Alright, in the previous lessons we explored the pandas timestamp object. And that represents a specific moment in time. It's something like a date with a specific time of day. For example, January 16th, 2003 at 4:35 p.m. So a timestamp is something that can be plotted on a calendar. It's something that represents a specific moment in time. The pandas time delta object in comparison represents a duration. What a duration is a time span or a length of time. In fact, the name time delta is basically a mathematical term for change over time. So it represents a distance of time, a difference between times. That is not going to have any kind of associated year or date with it. It's not like March or the year 2009. Rather, it represents a distance, so it's going to represent it in a time span, much like you tell someone, the event is 5 days, 3 hours, 2 minutes away. It represents a duration rather than a specific moment in time. There's two ways that we can create a time delta. The easiest way is to subtract two timestamps from each other to get the distance between them. So let's begin by creating two different pandas timestamps and assigning them to two different variables, and then we'll just subtract the variables from each other. So I'm going to call my timestamp method directly on pandas. This is timestamp, not time delta. And as a reminder, we can simply provide an argument here of a string. So let's say I select the 31st of March 2016. There you can see we've generated a pandas timestamp. Because we didn't provide an hour or minute or second argument, you can see that it's defaulted to midnight on that day. So I'm going to store this result in a variable called time A. And I'm also going to repeat the operation and create a second moment in time with my timestamp method. Let's say I do the exact same month just a few days earlier. So let's say I do 03/20. There's my new timestamp. Looks good to me. I'm going to assign it to a variable called time B. So now we have two different variables, each storing a pandas timestamp. And I'm going to subtract time B from time A. And before I complete this operation, just keep in mind that time B falls earlier in time than time A. So I'm subtracting the earlier date here, and the later date is right here. So what we're going to have when I execute this is a pandas time delta object. You can see there's no mention of the year of 2016 or the month of March. This rather represents a distance. It's just 11 days. It's a duration. So we can see here the distance between those 2 days is 11 days, 0 hours, 0 minutes, 0 seconds. Of course, if we wanted to make sure that these weren't zeros, all we have to do is modify these moments in time to include specific times of day. So for example, if I change this to 4:35:16 p.m., totally random values, and here let's do something in the morning, 02:16:49 a.m., re-execute that cell to have two brand new timestamps. Now we're going to have specific times throughout the day. If I execute this, you can see the distance between those two times is 11 days, 14 hours, 18 minutes, 27 seconds. And of course, if I pass this into time, we're going to get that it is in fact a pandas time delta object. It's not a timestamp. A timestamp, just to show you a comparison, if I pass time A in here, a timestamp is going to say it's a timestamp versus a time delta. So a time delta is not going to include a specific date. It's rather a duration or a lapse in time. Now just as a big heads up, if I subtract it in the other way, so if I did time A subtracted from time B, so time B represents the moment in time that comes a little bit earlier. We're basically subtracting the 31st of March 2016 from the 20th of March 2016. It's going to give me negative values because it is a negative duration to get from that first occurrence to the second one. So basically it's representing the time negatively. It's a duration of negative 12 days, 9 hours, 41 seconds, and 33 minutes to get to March 31st from March 20th. So just keep that in mind. Generally, to keep things simple, I always like to put the later date first, so I just have that positive duration. But just keep in mind that that's how pandas is going to present the information. It's not going to be an absolute value. It can be a negative duration when you're looking at from the pandas perspective. Now, that's the first way that we can create a time delta object. The second way is directly with the time delta method on the pandas library. So in these cells below, I'm going to just do pd dot. Let's type in time and press tab to take a look at our options. Our very first available option here is time delta. That's a constructor method that's going to create a new pandas time delta object for us. I'm going to press enter and provide my parentheses. Now the parameters here are basically the exact same as our date offset methods. So for example, if I wanted to create a duration or a time delta of 3 days, I can write days equals 3. And that's going to generate a pandas time delta object equal to 3 days. 3 days is my duration. Again, no specific moment in time, rather just a distance in time. Similarly, if I wanted to add something like minutes, I can do minutes equals 45. There we have it. If I wanted to do something like hours, I can do 12 hours, 3 days, 12 hours, 45 minutes. I can also provide something like weeks. It's going to do something interesting. So for example, if I do something like 8 weeks, you can see it's going to give me a time delta of 59 days. That's because every week has 7 days, so it's calculated 8 weeks times 7 days is 56 days, plus an additional 3 days from our dates parameter is a total distance of 59 days, 12 hours, 45 minutes, 0 seconds. Now, the one key caveat here in comparison to the date offset method is that the years parameter does not work, so we can't actually provide a number of years to work with here. So to account for that, I would recommend using the days parameter and just giving it multiples of 365 to represent a year, essentially. Now, in this example, we basically provided the custom parameters with our own arguments to specify how to create this distance in time. But the time delta constructor method is actually pretty versatile. And what it can actually accept is also a string that represents a specific lapse in time. So for example, instead of writing minutes equals 5, as we could have done right here, I can actually just write out as a string 5 minutes. And it's going to create for me a time delta that represents that distance in time. Similarly, I can do something like 6 hours, 12 minutes. And that's going to create a duration for me of 0 days, 6 hours, 12 minutes. I can add days here as well. So let's do 14 days, 6 hours, 12 minutes, 49 seconds. And now we've created that time delta duration. Now, what's interesting about this way of doing it is for some reason weeks does not work. It works here when you provide it as a parameter. If I were to type in weeks in here, for some reason it leads to an error. Maybe that's something that's underdeveloped in this current version of Pandas, which is 18.1. Generally speaking, I tend to prefer this way. I think it's a little bit more elegant. And even though you don't have to, I prefer to also put the greatest kind of span in time. A week is the longest thing here. I generally prefer to put it in the beginning and kind of decrease from the greatest length of time to the smallest. So weeks, days, let's put hours in front of minutes. That's just so that my result at the bottom when I output looks the same as I typed it. So let's take a look at this. We have 56 days, 12 hours, 45 minutes, 0 seconds. So that's the time delta object in Pandas. It represents a duration or a span of time. And in the next lesson, we'll show you how we can apply this to a real-life example with a custom data set. But basically, this is just to contrast it with the Pandas timestamp, which serves as a specific moment in time.